We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 79, PS 2001, and the title of course is not only a reference to 2001 Space Odyssey movie, but the PS is literally old school, that abbreviation which I think was more prevalent on the East Coast than in the West, where they would call schools PS for public school, number, whatever. This first aired on December 17th, 1981, so they had skipped the previous week for some reason. The IMDb synopsis is, Mirth attends school on Ork, where he is teased for being an, quote, Earthhead, end quote. This was the 5th episode directed by Bob Claver, and it was the first of 5 written by the team of Cindy Beagle and Lisa Kite. They had already written 2 Happy Days episodes and 3 for Laverne and Shirley. They mostly worked on 80s TV shows together. There's a nighttime exterior of the house with snow on the ground. Mirth in voiceover asks, what is this stuff? Mindy says it's a surprise for him, and then she says that it's Chinese food. Mork, Mindy, Mirth, and Fred are sitting at the dining table. Fred has his back to the camera, although there will be some cuts to him. There are boxes of Chinese food on the table. And I'll just say right now that the discussion of the Chinese food is borderline racist. The conversation here is mostly filler, but Mirth does say that it looks like boiled grass, which amuses Fred. Mork says it looks like dandruff. Mirth then says something about a fishnet, and Mork says something about a whale skin. For at least the second time in the series, Mork says he's hypoglycemic. This is always meant to be funny. Mirth asks Grandpop if they have American carryouts in China. Fred says not yet. Mork says on every religious holiday, all the Chinese people go downtown for Jewish food. So reversal of the cliche of Jews eating Chinese food. Mirth calls himself a very inquisitive child, and he believes that he's ready for school. All the other children are going to school. Why isn't he? And I don't know who all these other children are. Maybe he's seeing them at the park again. The adults exchange concerned glances. Mork says he and Mindy can teach Mirth everything he needs to know at home. He says that Abraham Lincoln studied at home. Mirth asks who's he. Mork says Min. Like he's heard of Lincoln but can't explain him. She tells Mirth that Abraham Lincoln was our 16th president. Mirth says he just feels weird, different. He should be going to school like the rest of the children. There's a cut to both Mork and Fred looking concerned. Mork says Mirth doesn't need school. Since Jeopardy's been canceled, what does he need to know? The original Jeopardy aired from 1964 to 79, so it was fairly recent that it left the air. And Alex Trebek wouldn't take over until 1984. Mork says that Mirth can always get a job on Family Feud, and he says, show me mayonnaise. At that time, we were still in the Richard Dawson era. Mindy pats Mirth's hand. She says an education is very important, and they're going to see that he gets a good one, somehow. They don't directly talk about this, but there is the problem that they cannot send him to an Earth school without having to answer a lot of questions. Homeschooling was not really a thing in the early 80s. I mean, it happened, but it was less common than it is now or would have been 50 or 100 years earlier. Fred tells Mirth he's not old enough for school yet. I've talked about this in the Mirth episodes, how rapidly Mirth is aging, how sometimes he seems like a preschooler and sometimes he seems older, but in this episode, they're pretty much settling on him being the equivalent of a kindergartner. Fred tells him to think of all the fun he's having at home. Mirth says that Fred has got to be kidding, and he asks if he thinks it's fun going upstairs and coming back downstairs and occasionally having Chinese food. This felt sort of lampshady. The thing of a lot of what happens with Jonathan Winters is he's coming downstairs and then going back upstairs. And I guess he has had Chinese food before, but is not impressed by it. And he asks Fred, do you call that living? There's a cut to Fred, and it looks like Conrad Janis is trying not to laugh. Mindy calls Mirth sweetheart, and he yells, no! She calls him sweetheart again and says he's a special little boy, and he's just going to have to be patient until they can make special arrangements. And I don't know if she and Mork have talked about him going to school, but now she's realizing they need to do something. Mirth sulks.
No. Now, Mirth, now mellow out. Mellow out. No, I want to go to school.
Mirth.
I want to be like the rest of the children, that's all. I'm not going to sit here with 4 or 5 boxes of empty goldfish cartons. I want to go to school.
That's enough, young man. You go to your room.
Ed, I wanted to go to school.
You go up now.
It really didn't hurt me at all. You just happened to crush my Carl Malden picture. I'm going. I want to go to school. I said I wanted to go to school. I'm going.
Mork, I don't mean to interfere, but I think you've got a big problem on your hands.
I've talked about this before, that Mirth can be kind of bratty. This episode, I guess he goes too far. He even mocks his father for using the term mellow out. He has a tantrum. Mindy spanks him, not hard, but you can definitely see there, and then how she glares at him to make him go back upstairs, that she's definitely the disciplinarian of the family. Mirth has a picture of Carl Malden, another celebrity in late middle age. And it's interesting what they decide to do in this episode. Instead of the cliche of the kid who doesn't want to go to school, Mirth is a kid who is insisting on going to school, and his parents are resisting. This is the only scene in the episode with Fred, and I thought it was good and interesting that they included him because he is the gentle voice of reason. Even though he doesn't give specific advice, he does recognize that this is a problem that they're going to have to solve. And again, this is something that was missing for much of season 2, not having Fred around. I'm glad that they found this new role, that Fred can be the wise grandfather. There's a nighttime exterior of the house. I can't tell if there's any snow on the ground, but probably. Mork and Mindy are in bed with their backs to each other. He's in his usual sleepwear, but she's in the pajamas that she wore before, so I guess her red and white sleep shirt and cap is only for special occasions. The lights are out in the bedroom. Someone makes a psst sound twice. Mindy says, "Not now, Mork. I've got to get up in the morning." Two things. One, it's the old "not tonight, I have a headache" kind of joke. But it's also that although Mindy often seems to have a night shift, sometimes she does work in the morning. The voice says, "It's not Mork, it's Orson." She sits up quickly and asks where he is. He says he's using the speaker in Mork's ear. I'm going to get back to this. There's a lot going on with Mork's ear in this series. Orson says that he and Mindy need to have a talk. She says, "Now?" He says, "Yes, now. I'm not here to make an appointment with you." He's too important to schedule this. The only time he can talk to her is when Mork is asleep in the middle of the night. She says she's not going to go into Mork's head because that's an invasion of Mork's privacy. Then there's thunder and lightning. I think that Orson can cause thunder from a great distance because we had thunder in the episode where Mork was going to defy Orson and get married. So I'm not sure how that works. Mindy says, "But then he and I never did have any secrets," which we know is so not true. She has to remember how to do this, but then she holds Mork's nose and puts her finger in his ear. She summons Orson. Mork snores, so we know that he's sleeping through this. Mindy stands in Mork's mind, and she's half asleep, still wearing those pajamas. She says, "Yo, your Space Mountain ship." So, Disneyland joke, and also a fat joke. She wakes up and apologizes because she definitely does not want to insult Orson. Orson excuses her and says when they're using Mork's mind, there's bound to be some ill effects. So I guess the fat jokes are just involuntary. She asks Orson to turn the heat up. It's kind of cold in here. He says Mork's mind isn't equipped with a thermostat. Orson told him to insulate. Heating joke? Possibly an energy joke? He sends her a big orange mug of coffee and she thanks him. He asks, "So how's the family?" She says, "Oh, they're just..." He cuts her off and says, "Enough small talk." So in case you're wondering why he was being so welcoming, he wants to know where the application is that Mork promised to fill out. She doesn't know anything about this. Orson wants Mirth's application for Orc Prep. He sent it to Mork bleems ago and hasn't heard from him since. Obligatory annoyance at the change in bleems. You remember way back in the beginning, a bleem was roughly 2,000 Earth years. Here in this sentence, it's used as ages ago. Later, it'll seem like it's equivalent to roughly a year. But basically, a bleem is whatever they want it to be. Mindy realizes that this is why Mork was acting so strange at dinner. I didn't think that Mork was acting that strange. I thought Mirth was acting strange. But I guess as his wife, she picked up on that he was pushing the homeschool thing a little harder than you might expect. She says she thought it was the MSG. So a joke about Chinese food. Orson doesn't get it, and she says never mind. She says she doesn't know how she feels about Mirth going away to school on Ork. Orson says she'll love it. He'll only go to school one day a month, Earth time. Not a big commitment, and I don't know why it's so rare. Times obviously strange. Orson says Mirth will commute. Air Ork's H-28 transport beam has merged with Glib's Thansa and is now serving the greater Earth area. So maybe a joke about airlines merging. So I guess this is to get around the thing of normally it would take Bleems, let's say, to travel between Ork and Earth in an egg. And I guess that makes sense because we have had Orkin's Zerko used a beam. She says she'll discuss it with Mork and they'll get back to Orson. He takes away the mug and says there will be no discussion. The application will be completed and on his desk in the morning. So he's talking to her like he's her boss. And sometimes Mindy is very good about standing up for herself, but she did just wake up in the middle of the night. She doesn't know what the consequences will be, so she's going to go along with this. But she does sarcastically thank him for the coffee and says it was delicious, and she only had a sip or two. Then, like he's in a commercial or helpful household hints program, he says, "My secret is eggshells in the grounds." And I thought that was kind of odd considering how sacred eggs are on Ork, but it was still cute. And she says that her grandmother used to do that. And I didn't know if she meant Cora or Fred's mother. Then he says, "Who cares?" And he says, "Nanu, Nanu." So he can kind of do the small talk, but he really doesn't like to. She says, "Oh, Nanu, Nanu to you too, sir." And then she walks off screen. We fade back to the bedroom where Mindy is still plugged into Mork's mind. He startles awake and says, "Aha! Sneaking around with Orson behind my brain?" I don't know if he thinks that she was trying to cheat on him with Orson in his head. Ultimate cuckolding situation. And he suspiciously asks what they were doing, and then he decides to try a positive approach, and maybe they're planning a surprise party for him. And then he imagines getting a belt sander. I didn't know what this was. It looks like it's a high power tool for sanding, smoothing, and leveling rough wood surfaces. I don't know why Mork would want that specifically, but I could kind of see him thinking it'd be fun. He calls her Honey 3 times, then Pooter, and then Little Pooter, the pet name, and he kisses her cheek. They're now both sitting up, and she asks why he didn't tell her about the application. He says, "Does this mean there's no surprise party?"
Well, puppies can be such snobs, man. You know, Biffy, that Krugerrand seems to have fallen out of your loafer. No, Muffy, come here, child. You have to take that alligator off your shirt. It's been dead for a month now.
The official Preppy Handbook came out in October of 1980. The Preppy stereotype was very big in early 80s media. Robin Williams had been doing a character similar to this anyway. Of course, ironically, Robin Williams came from a background like that, although changed quite a bit when his family moved to the West Coast. He has the very preppy nicknames Biffy and Muffy. The joke about the Krugerrand in a loafer, I think Krugerrands have come up on the show before, but this is like a penny loafer joke with the South African coin, the Krugerrand. And the thing about the alligator on the shirt, and of course he's talking about it as if it was a live alligator, that was a little very preppy logo, but I no longer remember which company. She says Mirth has to go to school, and he's got to be around kids like him in order to learn. She has accepted what Mirth has said and what Orson has said, and she's going to put it in their own terms. This is the best solution. Mork says that school is no substitute for experience. Look at Mork. He knows all the hosts of Real People. Skip Stevenson, John Barber, Sarah Purcell, and that black guy. And I think we've had references to Real People before, and that came out around the same time as That's Incredible. Was not as action-focused, more sort of quirky, real people. And the black guy was Byron Allen, and yes, I remembered that without looking it up. Thank you very much, aging Gen X brain. She asks why Mork doesn't want Mirth to go to school. He says the truth is that Mirth is growing up, and he won't need Mork anymore. Mork feels like he should go sit in the shed with Mirth's training wheels and that tire he uses for a teething ring. And of course we didn't actually see that, but we kind of visualized that he would have done that during his very brief infancy. And I was surprised that they have a shed. I mean, it makes sense because it's this big old house and there's probably a shed out back. Even though they've got the attic, it was Mork's bedroom and now Mirth's bedroom, so it's not the best place for storage. Mork is now turned away from Mindy, so she puts her hands on his shoulders. She says Mirth needs Mork now more than ever. This is another episode where Mork feels like he's not living up to what Mirth needs as a parent. Although it's not the focus, it's where we are in roughly the first half of the episode. She tells him that he knows all about Orc and can answer Mirth's questions, and it's only one day a month. Mork says she's absolutely right. He says he feels a little self-indulgent recently, like Ronald Reagan at a budget meeting. And I wasn't really sure what that meant because Reagan was trying to promote himself as a budget slasher, although the deficit did grow quite a bit under Reagan. That's another topic. And yes, there will be more bashing of Republicans in this episode. She says, so what do you say we get to that old application? He asks if it can't wait till the morning. Then there's thunder, so he jumps out of bed and says, it's just one little page anyway. He gets a book from the bookcase and says he hid the application in Merv Griffin's autobiography because he thought nobody had ever looked in there. It looks like Merv Griffin wrote a few autobiographies, so I'm not sure if he's referring to an actual one or just the concept because everybody thinks Merv Griffin is boring. There's a sunny daytime exterior of the house with snow on the ground. Mork and Mindy are in the kitchen and they're dressed for the day. I'm guessing this is not the immediate next day because it seems like Mindy does not have to go to work and she's dressed fairly casually in jeans. There are at least half a dozen sandwiches on the counter. Mirth has what looks like a construction worker's lunchbox, but it's got simple, brightly colored flowered decals. She calls to Mirth to hurry up or he'll be late, of course late for school. He descends the stairs in his school uniform. There's a black baseball cap with a red bill. He's got a red jumpsuit, but it's not like a spacesuit. It has a logo of a white egg and what I think is the Orkin letter R. We'll get glimpses of the Orkin alphabet in this episode. And he's wearing silver boots, basically the Orkin colors. He tells Mommy and Daddy that he's all ready for school. He says, look at me. And he says he shined his shoes so that they're almost silver. I guess he used silver shoe polish. Mork and Mindy come over and join him. Mirth says he shaved his face so close that the other children can identify with him, which calls back to the previous episode, Alienation, where he was worried that his facial hair was off-putting to the Earth children, not yet realizing how different he was. And it's ironic because one of his classmates does have facial hair, but we'll get to that. Mork says he can't take it. It seems like Mirth was hatched just yesterday. For those keeping track, that was only 6 episodes ago. Mirth points out that he'll be home that afternoon. Mork sadly says that he'll have to watch People's Court alone. This would have been the original People's Court that ran from 1981 to 93 with Judge Wapner. Mindy tells Mork that she thought they agreed that there wasn't going to be a scene, so she doesn't want Mork to be too emotional. Mork apologizes and says that Daddy is a little emotional, but he's over it now. And just quickly mention how much Mork has changed since the first season when he was ashamed of emotion and bottled it up and then they all came flooding out. At this point, he's more emotional in some ways than Mindy is. And again, this plays with gender stereotypes. He says it's like the time he heard that Tom Snyder was quitting. And I think that's at least the second reference to Tom Snyder, the host of the late night show Tomorrow. The travel beam beeps. Mork says that's it. There's the school beam now, like the school bus. Mork leads Mirth over to the front door, Mindy following with the lunchbox. Mork clasps Mirth's hands and calls him son, not the only time this episode, and tells him to make Mork proud. He also advises him not to be the organ carrier in the school band, and it sort of seems like a joke, like church organ is huge, but Mirth says, oh, they're hairy. A human organ? Mindy laughs like this caught Pam Dowler off guard. Mindy hands Mirth his lunchbox, which is heavy for him. She laughs again. She pats his shoulder and tells him to have a good day. She says they'll see him when he gets home. She kisses his cheek. Then the beam dissolves the couch. Mirth is surprised he's still here. Then the beam takes him. As Mork and Mindy take hands, he says that Mirth is gone. She says, so is my couch. What happens to that couch on this series? In the next scene, Mork is sitting on the attic stairs by the open living room window. We can see the tops of snow-covered trees. He's got a fishing pole out the window. He's wearing the same outfit as before, but now he's got a scarf and a hat that are in shades of brown. And Mindy is also in the same outfit from before. She enters from the bedroom carrying a full laundry basket. It doesn't really come up, so I don't know if there's a laundry room in the building, if she was going to go out to the laundromat. Maybe there's a washer and dryer in the kitchen, because she does take the basket into the kitchen, but it's just a prop that is quickly forgotten. She goes to Mork and asks what he's doing. He says, "Would you believe it? I'm cleaning my oven," and that's a reference to an oven cleaner commercial where the housewife would be doing some leisure activity. Meanwhile, the oven cleaner is cleaning her oven and she's freed. She asks, how are they biting his fishing? He says, not too bad. He had a little 5-foot Avon lady, but she got away. Don't know if we've had Avon ladies before. This used to be such a huge part of American culture. Women would sell cosmetics and similar products door to door. She tells him just because the baby's gone away to school is no reason to go crazy. So he's having kind of an empty nest syndrome. And she goes in the kitchen. He gets a bite, and it's their mail. He reels it in and takes it into the kitchen. He says maybe it's a letter from Mirth, which doesn't make any sense. How would it get there? But he's missing his child. He's disappointed when he realizes it's the Book of the Month Club. It's Gary Coleman, The Early Years. And I didn't know if he meant like it was such a small book that it fits in a standard size envelope. Maybe because Gary Coleman was still very young, he would have been 13 at that time. Maybe also reference to Gary Coleman being really small.
Do you realize how long it's been since we've been together alone? Isn't there anything you could think of that the two of us might do on a snowy afternoon?
Well, we can have our second annual pun, pass, and kick competition.
So we've had episodes where both of them are amorous, episodes where he's amorous and she's not. In this case, she is and he isn't because he's worrying about their child and missing him. We get to see the effect for the beam bringing back Mirth on the couch. Mork is very happy to see Mirth, but Mirth is not happy. Mork excitedly exclaims over Mirth as he and Mindy join him in the living room. Mindy sits next to Mirth and puts a hand on his shoulder. She asks why he's home, because there's 5 hours left of school. So Mindy just said that it's a snowy afternoon. So maybe it's noon? I mean, how late does this school run if Mirth was supposed to be back in the afternoon? Apparently there's 5 hours left by some measurement of time. In this scene and some other scenes, Mirth is crying without you actually seeing tears. He says he hates it there and he's not going back. He picks up his lunchbox, stands, and says, I hate it 3 times. He runs upstairs and they move closer. Mork calls upstairs, well, besides that, son, how was your day? Then they go upstairs and we go to commercial. There's another sunny exterior of the house with snow on the ground, so probably just a few minutes later. Mirth is in his egg bed with a blue blanket pulled up all the way over his face. Mork and Mindy are standing next to the bed. She tells Mirth to stop saying he hates it and tell them what happened. He pulls down the blanket and again says he hates it. Then more calmly he says he does hate it. The kids call him names and that teacher, Miss Giesbach, oh, she's cruel. Then he says, I hate her. We'll find out later that it's not necessarily all the kids calling Mirth names, but I'll talk about that when we get there. Mork is surprised that Miss Giesbach is still alive. He had her too, and he 3 times says that he hates her. I just want to mention Giesbach is one of those things like Giesbach that Mork would say as an exclamation, so I didn't know if that was like a callback to that. I don't know if Robin Williams had input on that name, but I think it's meant to sound a little bit like Geezer, so we'll picture her as very old. Mindy pulls Mork aside and says this isn't what she calls a positive attitude. So again, the thing of there are times that Mindy is the more positive one and Mork is more negative, and so we're pretty much in that zone this episode. He says that when he hears the name Miss Giesbach, it's like saying disarmament to Alexander Haig. Haig was the White House Chief of Staff for Nixon and Ford, and then he was the Secretary of State under President Reagan, and he definitely had a military background. Mork and Mindy go back to Mirth, and she tells him that she had teachers she didn't like too, but they were usually the ones she learned the most from. Well, that's not my experience, but good for you, Mindy. Mirth says he just doesn't fit in any world. Although I find Mirth annoying as a character, it is kind of a poignant situation that he's not accepted by Earth children or Orkin children so far. He says this is worse than being called Butchie the dog-faced boy, which was what the kids implausibly were calling him in the previous episode. Mindy tells him not to say that. He's just the new kid in school, and that's not easy. Mork asks if Mirth ever saw Massacre at Central High. This was the 1970 1976 horror movie, and from the IMDb synopsis, it does look like there was a transfer student as the main character. Obviously, just going for a joke. Mork, I hope, would know whether or not his very young child had seen a 5-year-old horror movie. Mindy gives Mork an annoyed look, and Mirth looks confused. Mindy says she came home crying from her first day of school, too. She never would have gone back if her mom and dad didn't take her to class. So I thought that was interesting. We don't know exactly how old Mindy was when her mother died. I think I figured it was about 6 or 7. It's plausible that her mother was still alive when Mindy started kindergarten. This gives her an idea. She suggests that she and Daddy go with Mirth to his school. She takes Mork's hand, and there are moments here where they're like trying to have solidarity, united front as parents. Mirth says he'll see what Teddy says, and he takes a flattened Teddy out from under the covers. I assume this is the same Teddy as Bonzo from the previous episode. He says he has trust in Teddy. He asks Teddy to tell him the truth. He holds Teddy to his ear and it makes quiet sounds like Teddy is talking. Then he says that Teddy says yes. And it's interesting to me, getting back to Mindy as a small child, that she had Mr. One-Eye. Mirth takes after her and has this favorite teddy bear that he confides in and that looks worse for wear. Mork tells the two of them to have a nice time. He tries to leave. Mindy grabs his arm and says the three of them will have a nice time. She's sure Miss Giesba will be very happy with the way Mork turned out. Mork doesn't think so. Once on a field trip to the sun, and I don't know if it's our sun or a different sun, she made Mork wear a coat. So it sounds like she was specifically picking on Mork, and I don't know if she realizes that Mirth is Mork's child. Probably. I mean, she would read the application. He and Mirth keep saying they hate her. Mindy walks away and puts her hands on her hips like she's just had enough of them. These are probably recycled shots of the planet and city from the honeymoon episode, and we can see a bit of the classroom here. It's very brown with silver chairs. Then we can see how they arrive by beam, and I'll have some clips later to show a little bit more of the classroom. Mindy says, wow, I've never had my molecules scattered all over the universe before. So I guess the beam kind of dissolves you and then puts you back together. I'm not sure exact mechanics on that. She wonders if she's all here. Mork says yes, except she's bald. She checks and he says, made you look. He says he's very happy to be back in school, which surprised me because there was a whole thing about how he didn't enjoy school because of Miss Giesba. I mean, we know he enjoyed the boys' school that he went to with the clones later in life. I assumed the primary school. Maybe PS stands for primary school rather than public. Anyway, I assume that that was not a pleasant experience at the beginning, but maybe now that he's actually there, he's getting a little nostalgic. The classroom door slides open with a kind of a whisk sound, and I don't know if that's like on Star Trek. Is that what they did? A girl who looks like she's about 10 enters. She has her brown hair in a bun. She wears glasses. She has a red cape with 2 silver triangles on it and a long gray dress with white buttons down the front of the top and a black belt. She also wears silver boots and silver gloves, so very much the Orkin colors, black, silver, and red. She snaps, Mirth! She wags her finger at him and calls him young man. She says, we do not leave the room without getting a hall pass. I'm just going to say right now, Team Giesba, this woman makes sense. Sure, the hall pass thing was a little bit strict, but my gosh, he traveled across the universe without asking permission. I know he's a little kid, but just very irresponsible. He's lucky that there weren't worse consequences. Now, Mindy calls her sweetheart, because she thinks this woman is a child, and says, excuse me, sweetheart, I'm Mirth's mother. Could you tell me where Miss Giesba is? She says, I'm Miss Giesba, and don't talk down to me. Then she recognizes Mork, who calls her ma'am. She goes over to him and tweaks his ear and says he still owes her a book report. He says, sorry ma'am, the last one burned up on re-entry. And then he tells her to please not do that because his lobes will be hanging down to his knees. Just want to mention, when Mork had a date with Laverne, there was like this erogenous zone involving his ear. We later learn that his ears twist off. Also, the thing that he has a speaker in his ear. How does that work? And yeah, Mindy can enter his mind through his ears. There's a lot going on with Orkin ears, or at least Mork's ears. Mirth says, see, I told you she was tougher than a rawhide shoe stick. He points at Giesba and says, I'm talking about you. So he's not scared of Miss Giesba, although his parents are. He just hates her. Mindy goes over to Miss Giesba and takes her aside while Mork links arms with Mirth. Mindy says that Mirth came home very upset. They were hoping they could talk to her about him adjusting to this environment.
See here, I've been a teacher for 43 bleens, And no one tells me how to run my classroom.
Now, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business, you little... It's just we were trying to make this a more positive experience for Mirth.
I'm sure everything will be fine once Mirth gets to know the other children and our alphabet. You're welcome to observe, as long as he behaves.
I hate her, I hate her, I hate her.
Miss Giesba has been a teacher for 43 Bleems, so that's why I was thinking, like, oh, it's like a year. And I guess that sort of gives you an idea of the maximum number of years old that Mork is, but probably not, because there's no consistency. And in this clip, you can see more of the decor of the room, including a map of Ork with that lettering. And Mindy is trying to reason with Miss Giesba, because that's what Mindy tries to do, but she loses her temper because she's also somebody with a temper. My note is, Giesba tough, but I don't think awful. I think she's stern, but she's not cruel. Mirth says, what did I tell you? She's the house of correction. Like she's a jail, I guess? He also says that Miss Giesba is a mean little small person. And I think it's not just that she's short, but she's a small person in the sense of petty. The bell rings with an eerie sound to it. The door slides open. Mirth looks petrified. He wasn't scared of Miss Giesba, really, but his classmates are a different matter. The students skip in, and they're wearing uniforms like Mirth's. There are 6 of them, and I think it was 4 boys and 2 girls. All of them are white. They look like they're late middle-aged, and it's one thing I've noticed. Although we get elderly people played by children, as with Miss Giesba and the Elder, they never show somebody really, really old as a child in the series, as far as I can recall. It's more like people in their 50s or 60s, but it's never a performer who looks like they're in their 80s, which maybe says something about working lifespans with Bleems, who knows. Mark says, aren't they cute at this age? The last to enter is a buxom blonde with a long braid with a red ribbon in it, and her school uniform is low cut. We'll later find out that this is Zelka. She tells Mirth that she missed him at recess, and she's acting like a little girl with a crush. She playfully runs her hands up his chest and says she waited for him in the sandbox. Mork tells Mindy that it's very nice that Mirth has already made a little friend. And Mirth has his hand to his mouth in a tee-hee gesture, so it's clear that whether or not he has a crush on Zelka, he doesn't think that girls are icky or anything like that. Mindy says in a catty way that she has the feeling that this girl is everybody's little friend. We'll get back to this in the next episode, but there is some weirdness with the Mirth-Zelka thing. The last student enters, and it's a man with a mustache. He calls Mirth Earthhead a couple times. This is who's calling Mirth names. It's possible some of the other students played by extras who don't have lines have also been picking up on that, but this student is clearly the ringleader, and Mirth no longer looks happy. The boy says he's sorry he was mean to Mirth this morning. Mirth says, that's okay, Ovitz, and Mindy says, isn't that nice, Mirth? I talked about this in a previous episode. We've had the term Ovitz come up before, and this is actually a reference to a real-life Hollywood agent. It's interesting that they gave the name to Mirth's antagonist. I think maybe they kind of become frenemies, but interesting use of it in this episode and the next one. Ovitz says they should shake and make up. The handshakes on this episode are just like Earth handshakes. Mirth is worried that Ovitz is kidding, but he shakes hands. Then Ovitz punches him in the stomach and laughs. Mork yells at Ovitz and chases after him. Miss Giesba wraps her pointer on her podium and scolds Mork for fighting again. So I guess he used to fight when he was in school. She tells him to take his seat. He says, yes, ma'am. Still scared of her. There's a cut to Ovitz grinning. Then he makes sort of a nose-tweaking gesture, like, I'm gonna tweak your nose. Mindy goes to Miss Giesba and asks if she saw what that other kid did. Miss Giesba says, no, I didn't, and no one likes a tattletale. Sit. So that was the one thing that Miss Giesba did. Okay, that was unfair. She should be doing a better job of disciplining her students, or at least being aware of what's going on in the classroom. But she's elderly, and maybe she plays favorites. Mirth twice says to hit a child, and I didn't know if that was a quote of something. The audience laughed, but maybe it was just that he refers to himself in the third person. Mindy goes to him and calls him sweetheart. She tells him to sit down, and they'll be back there, meaning the back of the classroom. Ovitz is now sitting, and Mirth is crying. He tells Mommy and Daddy that no matter what happens, he still loves them, like he's gonna die or something. He reluctantly takes takes the empty seat next to Ovitz in the front row, and Zelka is sitting behind them. Miss Giesba starts writing what I think is the alphabet on the chalkboard. Ovitz calls Mirth Earthhead again and says that if he doesn't want old Giesba to call on him when she asks a question, all he has to do is raise his hand. We can definitely hear this actor's New York accent come through in this, and I will talk about these performers in a little bit. Mirth asks, "Can I be sure of this, Ovitz?" And Ovitz says, "What are friends for?" So he's pretending that he's really Mirth's friend, and poor Mirth is still pretty gullible. Zilda looks dubious about this. Miss Giesba asks the class if anyone can tell her who invented the flying saucer. The class looks like they're discussing this, and then Mirth slowly raises his hand. Zelka looks impressed that he knows this. And I wanted to hear it. I want to know who invented the flying saucer, but we never find out. Miss Giesba calls on Mirth, and the class laughs, except for Zelka. She's loyal. Mirth guesses Benjamin Franklin, and the class laughs more. So Mirth guesses Aretha Franklin. The class laughs even more, and Zelka shakes her head. Miss Giesba scolds, "That will be enough, class." More quietly tells Mindy not to worry. Colleges are very expensive nowadays anyway, so don't worry. Kid isn't doing well in school, but it's not like we want him to go to college anyway. Miss Giesba says they'll now have Manilow appreciation, so reference to Barry Manilow. The students and Miss Giesba put on silver headphones. Mort does too, because he's just in this class mode and he's following Miss Giesba's instructions. But Mirth gets up and tiptoes back to his parents. Mort takes off the headphones and he and Mindy go to Mirth. He tells them they can't make him stay here. Well, they can, but if they do, he'll hold his breath. Mindy tells him not to worry. Mommy's gonna go talk to that little old pipsqueak. Mort stops her and says they've got to come down to work here instead of down to earth.
You've never been the object of ridicule except for that time when you tried to play the Mikado. Son, I know exactly how you feel. See, when I was going to school, I was the one they made fun of. Kids will make fun of you as long as you let them. But if you have pride in yourself, there's nothing that anyone can say. That's why, you see, hold your chin up high. Then they can really deck you. You have any idea what it's like sitting next to Ovitz?
Just ignore Ovid.
In this clip, we get a nice view of the city out the window. Mort says that Mindy has never been the object of ridicule except for the time she tried to play the Mikado. And I didn't know why that made her the object of ridicule, but Pam reacts like it's an ad-lib. The advice that Mort gives Mirth about kids making fun of you is pretty dubious, although it will work out in this episode. Mirth says he will just ignore Ovitz. Miss Giesba says that's enough Manilow, so they all take off their headphones. I don't know how they heard her say that's enough Manilow, but maybe they know the class routine. She says she doesn't want to get their blood sugar level too high, and I guess that's like saying that Manilow was too sappy. She says, "Now, boys and girls, it's time for show and tell. Who wants to go first?"
I've got something I'd like to show Mirth. Zelka, when you have something new to show, raise your hand. Perhaps Mirth has something he'd like to share.
Well, yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I do, Miss Giesba. I guess, first of all, most of you by this time know that I'm from Earth. I have something that none of you have here on Orc. None of you. I have parents.
Herons? What are those?
Well, Mommy and Daddy, come on down.
Listen, what can parents do that a test tube don't?
Well, for instance, you drop them, they don't break.
Oh,
No. Other than that, I'll tell you some other things. First of all, they, both of them brought me life and love.
Oh.
Also, the one thing they don't let me do is barbecue in the bedroom. That's bad. But when I'm real good, and I try to be most of the time doing that, they always give me something like this.
Oh, wow! What is that?
Oh, could I see that? Oh,
What does it
excuse me,
do?
Mr. Mort.
Well, this is a frog.
A frog?
Yes, see? He's amphibious. Huh? That's a very big word for me, amphibious. That's means that he can swim in the water, and he's also pretty good on the land. And he eats flies, of course. Has a long tongue. Sucks in a lot of flies. And also you find him at some of the better French restaurants. And he goes...
Excuse me, Earthhead. Could I hold him? If you let me hold him, I promise you I won't hit you no more.
Okay? You hold your hands real high over.
Like that?
That's right. Hold a little higher in the palms. Keep your palms.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
Okay.
You know, I could really deck you right now. But I won't.
Huh?
Why? Because I'm bigger than you are. What a wonderful child I am.
Zilka wants to do show and tell specifically with Mirth, and it makes it sound like she wants to show off parts of her body. And Miss Gizba sounds kind of catty when she shuts her down, saying something old. Mirth decides that he's going to show and tell his parents, and he tells them to come on down, so like the Price is Right game show. I think it was interesting that Zilka doesn't know anything about parents, but Ovitz at least knows they're kind of like a test tube. Mirth says that his parents provide him with life and love. He takes out a frog, and there was an episode before, I think it was My Dad Can't Beat Up Anybody, where Mirth was carrying a frog around his pocket for days, maybe weeks. So I don't know if it's the same frog. And we see it in close-up shots, and then when people are holding it in their hands, it looks like it's just a prop. But this is what really impresses the kids, which makes sense. You know, parents, doesn't really make any sense. But a frog is really cool to kids their age. And Mork and Mindy look very proud of their son. Mirth makes a reference to frog legs. Ovitz calls him Earthhead again, but now it's just like a fun nickname and it's not meant hostilely, and the boys kind of joke about whether they're going to hit each other. And Mirth says, "What a wonderful child I am." Miss Gizba comes out from behind the podium and tells Mork and Mindy that their little boy is going to be just fine. So I thought that was sweet. She shakes hands with Mindy, who thanks her for letting them observe. So I guess parents don't usually sit in the classroom. But Miss Gizba tells Mork to stand up straight and don't forget that book report. So call back to earlier. Mork says that he's doing it on the wit and wisdom of Richard Nixon, and it'll be 1 page only, which actually is pretty long for a book report, but the implication is that Richard Nixon was neither wise nor witty. Mindy again shakes Miss Gizba's hand and thanks her for letting them observe. For some reason, Mindy really bonded with Miss Gizba, even though she's the Earthling, more so than Mork. Maybe because he still has this fear of her as his teacher from early childhood. Mindy tells Mork that he handled that so well with Mirth, and he's a good father. He says, "Oh, bless you, Mind." This is another episode where Mork has doubts about being a good parent, and Mindy reassures him. He says they've got another hour till the next beam. So I guess it's sort of like a bus or other travel where it doesn't run every moment. You have to look at the schedule. And he thinks they should go shopping. And that would have been a fun scene to see what they could buy. I mean, I love the honeymoon episode, but it would have been fun to see them exploring the city a little bit more, like if it had been a two-parter. She says it sounds fun. As they're leaving, his line sounds looped, as he says that maybe they can buy her a normal-sized nose. And this is another episode where Robin makes fun of Pam's perfectly fine nose. As they go, the students are still gathered around Mirth and the Frog, so we know that Mirth is going to be okay. There's a nighttime exterior of the house with snow on the ground. Mork summons Orson. This time he calls him your fat farmness. Orson seems to be in a good mood, and I guess it's because they did what he asked and sent the application, and Mirth got into orc prep. He asks how the little fella is doing in school. Mork is proud to say that Mirth is doing better than Mork did. Orson proudly says, "That's my godson." And Mork says, "He is indeed, sir." Orson says, "Today orc prep, tomorrow orc med," like orc medical school, even though it's not clear whether orc has doctors per se. Mork says that's a very nice thought, but he's not entirely sure that that would be Mirth's choice. He thinks that although it's good to encourage your child to shoot for the stars, it's not always good to choose which galaxy. And if it was up to the parents, there'd be only 3 jobs in the world: doctor, lawyer, and wholesale jeweler. You can tell this is from another era. Don't think parents are pushing their kids to be lawyers like they were in the 70s or 80s. Orson asks if Mork doesn't want Mirth to pursue a career that he would be proud of. Mork says that's not their decision. They'll honor his choice, even if he wants to be a network executive. And I'm sorry, that was the only time I laughed out loud. Any joke about the network is going to get to me. And then he signs off. Then we go to the credits, and we see that Miss Giesbob was played by special guest star Luann. Her last name was actually Sirota, but she didn't use that. She played Annie on stage. She was 11 at the time this was taped. Most of her TV work was in the 80s, but she did do a TV movie in 2011. I really enjoyed her performance. I wouldn't say it's quite on the level of Tammy Lauren or Dana Hill, but she brought some nice, stern, but, well, I won't say fair, stern but not cruel quality to the role. You could see why Mork was still afraid of her, but you also feel like, okay, he can leave his kid in her care one day a month. Then the other two guest stars are just simply guest stars. They're not special guest stars. Maureen Arthur played Zelka. She lived from 1934 to 2002, so she would have been 47 at the time of this episode. Her first role was in Hot Rod Gang in 1958. She had a memorable role on Laverne and Shirley as Frank DeFazio's girlfriend that nobody liked. She was trying to take over his restaurant and his life. It's a very different role than here. Her last appearances were 2 episodes of Empty Nest in the 90s. I most know her for her roles in 2 cheesy 60s sort of sex comedies. One is The Love God, where she is a publisher's wife who is happy to pose for the men's magazine that Don Knotts ends up running, and she's Bob Hope's girlfriend in the movie How to Commit Marriage, where his character is going through a divorce. And so she was sort of this not quite middle-aged sex pot. So this, in a sense, is closer to that than what she did on Laverne and Shirley. She does a good job with this role. The role is a little bit icky, but she does play it sincerely, so good for her. The other guest star is much better known. That is Harvey Lembeck as Ovitz, and he lived from 1923 to 1982. In fact, his second appearance on Mork and Mindy was not long before his death. His first role was in the movie You're in the Navy Now in 1951. He is possibly best known for 142 episodes of the Phil Silvers Bilko Show, but he also would be very well known for playing the very middle-aged looking Eric Von Zipper, leader of the motorcycle gang, in several Beach Party movies with Frankie and Annette. Most significantly for his connection to Mork and Mindy, he ran a drop-in improv classroom in the 70s. 2 of the people who took the class were John Ritter and Robin Williams. And so he was a mentor of sorts for Robin. He has a difficult role here because he is a nemesis in a different way than Eric Von Zipper, where he's a bully but not horrible. But you could see how he would be able to make Mirth cry. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it delivers what I'm looking for in the series, and I have mixed feelings about this episode. It is interesting to get back to Ork and to see what an Orkin school is like. In some ways, the second half is better than the first half. Not thrilled about some of the parenting going on in this episode, but Mork and Mindy are still pretty new at this. Their child, by my calendar, is only a couple months old. They just weren't really prepared for him to go off to school, but maybe they should have been. They're not communicating too well with each other, but they are trying. It's just not a very funny episode. Like I said, there was just that one laugh right at the end for me. But it wasn't a really painful episode. It was just kind of there like, oh, yeah, Al Haig joke. Yeah, okay, I got that. It's better than some of the episodes we've had lately. I'm going to go with a 2 3/4 because it's not quite there to a 3, but it's better than a 2.5, obviously, with the math. Like a C plus B minus kind of fence. And definitely there were things they could have done better, but it was interesting. It was fine. I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how well it promotes and supports the romantic relationship of Mork and Mindy. And this was an odd one because they were almost going to be shippy and then they backed away. But there is Mork and Mindy touching and holding hands a lot. I mean, they're more in a parental mode, and when she tries to shift back to romance, it doesn't work. Things have been generally less shippy since Mirth came along, so this continues that trend. Last episode was, oddly enough, more shippy than I expected it to be. I understand they had to have Mirth leave school early, and so that wasn't going to go too far with that. As I've hinted, the next episode is a follow-up on this, with Murph's classmates coming over. It's not a two-parter, but the two episodes are linked, and so some of the things that happen in this episode I will expand on more next time. I would marginally recommend this episode. Again, you kind of need it for the Murph arc and to see how are things going with his development and how are Mork-and-Mindy dealing with parenthood at this stage. And it is nice to have Fred chiming in a bit. 2 3/4 eggs, 1 heart. This is Paula Schaffner with PS 2001. Get that application and or the book report on my desk tomorrow morning at the latest.
All this and a lot more on More Real People. But now, here are the real people, our hosts, Sarah Purcell, John Barber, Skip Stevenson, Byron Allen,